How about the argument that asks, why did God wait so long to create the universe? Because if God is in time, that meant he existed forever and ever and ever in the past, and he just waited for an infinite long period and then created. Why didn't he do it sooner so you and I could have had this conversation earlier?
This is a question that Leibniz pressed against Newton and his followers like Samuel Clarke. And I think that it is a sound argument against thinking that God has endured through an infinite sequence of temporal moments prior to the moment of creation. I think that that argument does show that that's impossible. And so what that implies, I think, is that time must have had a beginning, and that in some mysterious way God existed not before time, that would be a self-contradiction, but he existed in some way beyond time. And so the way I would put it is this, is that God is timeless without creation, and he is temporal since the moment of creation. So the decision to create on God's part is a decision to enter into time, to take on a temporal mode of existence in order to relate to his creatures.
That almost sounds like God is changing his internal characteristics.
Well, it depends on whether or not you think that God's temporal status is essential to the nature of God. And I don't think that we should say that. I think that it is essential to God to be eternal. And by that we mean he is without beginning or end. He neither came into existence nor will he go out of existence. So everyone can agree that God is eternal. But the question is he eternal in the sense of existing throughout infinite time? Or is he eternal in the sense of just being timeless and therefore having no beginning or end? And what I want to suggest is that God's mode of existence is a contingent property of God dependent upon his will. If God chooses to remain changeless and alone and never create, then he will exist timelessly. But if he chooses to create a world, then he will exist temporally. So I think that it makes sense to say that God is eternal in the sense of having neither beginning nor end. He is permanent.
Nobody argues that one.
Right. So that is an essential property of God, but it's up to God whether or not he exists timelessly and eternally or temporally and eternally.
So can he change his mind and go back?
Now that's a really profound question. Could God, say, annihilate the universe and annihilate the world and resume a state of timelessness? I don't think so. And the reason is
that he doesn't want to, or it's impossible?
That it would be impossible.
You think it's impossible for God to do that?
I think so, because I think that, given the nature of time, that if God were to annihilate the world, it would always make sense to say that God did, the world did exist. He did annihilate it. And he no longer exists with a world. So once time comes into being, that fact is always a temporal fact, even if God annihilates everything and goes back to a state of changelessness.
So that was a big decision he made.
Yeah.
I mean, because that got him into time, and we're saying once he was in time, he was locked there forever.
Well, the word locked, again, is an emotionally loaded term. I mean, in one sense, as we were talking about a moment ago, you can be locked in timelessness, like a frozen mannequin, unable to do anything, to respond to anything. In one sense, God liberates his activity and relationships by entering into time so that he can interact with his created world of temporal persons.
One can argue either way, which is better. You have a good argument. But what I'm saying is once that decision was made, it's irrevocable.
I think that's right. But of course, God does that with full knowledge. I think it is part of the condescension of God, frankly, Robert, that God, out of his love for us and his desire to relate to us, would quit this state of eternal, timeless perfection that he enjoyed and take on our temporal mode of existence in order to sustain relationships with us.
You are then limiting God, because God is now in a state from which he cannot remove himself. He is in time and forever thereafter has to be.
it's no more limitation on God's power than his inability to create a square circle or a married bachelor. These are logical impossibilities, and being omnipotent doesn't mean the ability to do the logically impossible.
Sure, but God could have never made it a married bachelor or square.
And he could have never created time or the universe and entered into it. So, again, if you think of it as a limitation,
once he did that,
it's
he
a
was then
self-limitation. Right. And once he's done it, I think that he will remain always in time. But that is no more an infringement of God's ability than, as I say, doing some other logical impossibility, like making a square circle or something of that sort.
But this is a conscious decision on God's part to do something from which he cannot emerge, whereas as squaring a circle or a married bachelor is something he never could have done. Because that's
right. That's right. I mean, he could have never created a bachelor at all, but it lies completely beyond God's power to create a married bachelor or a square circle. These are logical impossibilities. And in the same way, it's logically impossible to bring it about that the past which existed has not existed.
Right.
That's as much a self-contradiction as a square circle.
I agree, but God makes that conscious decision to put himself in that condition.
Yes, that's right. And
so he does it because of this desire to develop relationship with his created creatures.
Yes, I think that's right. It would be similar to his giving free will to creatures. God limits himself in such a way that he creates persons who are able to rebel against him and do things that are contrary to his will, that are beyond his control, because it's logically impossible to make someone freely do something. So I don't think there's any problem in thinking that God enters into situations in which he doesn't control everything.